Ontario, Canada. The rolling landscape north of Toronto is dotted with picturesque towns and idyllic farms. With little violent crime, residents are trustworthy and quick to offer help to strangers in need. But in 1970, that rural hospitality was taken advantage of by a brutal criminal one, whose crime soon sparked a province-wide manhunt. May 1970, Albert and Doreen Morby live near the town of Gormley, just 35 kilometers north of Toronto. Although Doreen worked full-time in the past, she now spends her days at home, looking after the couple's 21-month-old son. She was a nurse, and she had a baby. Her husband was a school teacher, and she lived in a modern home, but in a rural setting. That is to say, there was no neighbors really close by her. For all intents and purposes, she was happily married at a good position, and was at peace with the world, really. May 6th, Wednesday, 7:45 a.m. The day starts off like any other as Albert Morby heads off to work a 15-minute drive away. She, say goodbye to her husband, went off to work, went off to teach school, and she was at home with her son. She had a number of visitors in the morning. The guests that morning are well known to Doreen Morby, but sometime after lunch, a stranger pulls up to her house. We don't know how he got in. We don't know what sort of ruse he used to gain entrance into Mrs. Morby's home. Someone they knocked on the door. We feel knocked on the door, and she let them in under some pretense or other. In the minutes that follow, the day takes a tragic turn. 5 p.m. later that same afternoon, Doreen's husband Albert returns from work. 2:33. When he arrived home, he discovered that the front door of the house was locked, which was unusual. Mrs. Morby was usually always at home, and when he knocked, there was no answer. Once inside, he stumbles across a gruesome sight. When they went into the house, he found his wife lying in a pool of 303 blood with their 21-month-old son, Brent, under with his legs pinned underneath her, and his little infant 310 playing around the kitchen floor unharmed, playing with the body of his mother. Mrs. Morby was shot a total of 7 times, 5 times in the head and twice in the back. This person, whoever was doing this, decided for certain that she was dead. It's like this tragic event. Getting up, go to work, and you kiss your wife goodbye, and all of a sudden you come home at night, and your whole world is upside down. He subsequently took Brentham, his son, and ran down the road to the neighbor's house in order to get help. Ontario Provincial Police cordon off the isolated house, along with numerous bullet wounds. Evidence suggests that Doreen Morby has been sexually assaulted. One of the most sadistic, meaningless murders that anybody could ever imagine. I kind of thought it might have been somebody local that knew she was alone. Her body is removed for a post-mortem examination as forensic experts comb the scene for clues left behind by the killer. The corporal with the identification unit, Charlie Rosem, attended the scene and took all the necessary photographs and exhibits. The job of an identification officer is important. We're the keepers of all the evidence. Photography is a large portion of what we do in recording crime scenes. On our approach, we'd be looking for tire track evidence, footwear patterns. In that incident, you're looking at a photo photography of the print, the photographs that were taken by the identification unit officers, which were black and white photographs at that time. Corporal Rosem at the time took fantastic notes and had great continuity of all exhibits that were taken at that particular time. Besides fingerprints and foot impressions belonging to the Morby family, police come up empty-handed. Even the shell casings from the fired bullets have been removed from the scene. While they continue to search for a lead, news of the violent attack shocks the peaceful rural area. It was quite a chilling sort of event to have occurred in that small community. And in those days, rural areas, people left the doors unlocked and sort of, Trusted your neighbor, because there's an innocence lost when these things happen. While the community reels, the post-mortem examination sheds more light on the crime. Since more than 6 bullets were used to murder Doreen Morby, investigators feel that the killer used a .22 caliber weapon, 6.26, with a larger than normal ammunition chamber. The belief was back in 1970 that Mrs. Morby had been shot, by someone using a .22 caliber revolver that was possibly 9 shots. The theory was that the killer would unlikely reload after discharging the usual 6 bullets in a revolver. A 9-shot revolver in 1970 was not a very common gun. Due to the sexual assault, the killer also left behind bodily fluid in the form of semen. Although DNA testing is not yet available as a forensic tool, investigators are able to perform a simple blood typing test. They learned that not only does the killer possess type A blood, he carries an even rarer form known as type A secretator. It is a blood type possessed by only 1/3 of the population. Armed with this new information, police fan out to interview friends, family members, and persons of interest in the community. Anybody who became a suspect provided blood samples back then, but all they could tell you was whether they were A, B, or O. You could have lots of suspects who were secretrators. And so, how do you eliminate them? May 13th, 1970. 1 week has passed since the murder. Despite the scientific ability to clear certain suspects, there are no big breaks in the case. At Ontario Provincial Police Headquarters, the investigation file is named Homicide Number 3, so titled for being the 3rd unsolved murder of the year. Within a week, they will be facing Homicide Number 4 as the killer strikes again. May 14th, 1970. The violent sexual assault and murder of Doreen Morby sends shockwaves through Ontario. 8:38. Although police know the blood type of the killer, as well as the kind of weapon used, they have few concrete leads. At the time, Russell and Helen Ferguson also live in a rural area outside of Toronto, just 40 kilometers west of the crime scene. We had heard about it, and we knew it was a way over on the other side of the city. I remember being somewhat concerned. The Fergusons share the same professions as the family that fell victim to the attack. Russell is a teacher, and his wife Helen, although now at home with their 3 children, was trained as a nurse, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. We were young and rambunctious, and I had a brother that was 6 at the time, and my sister was 5. So yeah, life was good. Of course, Helen devoted herself to looking after and raising 3 children. I guess typical children full of life, so on. It was a nice spot for them. Lots of room for them to romp and play when they were at home. We were a close family. May 19th, 1970. Apart from their oldest son, Dale, being ill, the day starts off normally for the Ferguson family. Dale had had mumps, and he was sick in bed. And so I said, "You get a doctor's appointment lined up for Dale, and I'll be home." And so off I went to work. Later that day, with Helen and her son Dale both at home, a stranger pulls into the yard. I'm not even sure what time it was, when there was a knock on the door, and he saw his mother go to the door, and when she returned and came in the house, it was a gentleman with her. She stuck her head in the door, and behind her was this man that I had never seen before. And she told me that this man had a sick boy in the car, and that she was going to give him directions to the hospital. She was marched upstairs, and it's felt that he had a weapon on her at all times. And then, I went back to watching TV. Forgot the guy was even there. To the best of my recollection, it was at least an hour later, I would say, I heard 3 loud bangs. I had no idea what they were at the time. I thought they were fireworks or firecrackers. That was the first thought, was Mommy and that man are playing with fireworks. He went to see what was happening. He saw the intruder was leaving through the back door as Dale looked up, and he was wiping fingerprints off of door handle, and he rubbed the door knob, and out he went. He also looked out the window and saw the car. It was a gravel driveway. Stones flew in the air. The guy sped away. The house was deadly silent. So I called my mother's name a couple of times, and I looked down the hallway, and she was laying in what turned out to be a pool of blood. She had a look on her face which I can't forget, and I just knew she was dead. Lifeless eyes, and she just didn't look like my mother at all. It would have to be a horrendous ordeal for a boy of 8 years old to go through. He, in turn, for an 8-year-old boy, was very alert and had called to the police. Around the same time, Russell Ferguson returns from work, still unaware of the violent attack that has just transpired. I got home and came in, and first thing I saw was a lying on the floor, and was blood, and never dreamed of what the reality was. And I was over and put my ear down to her breast, and I could hear her heart beating, and it was mine, but it was just thumping in my ears. He was pretty distraught and yelling, "Oh, Helen," or "Oh my God, Helen," or something to this effect. And all I remember is waiting for police and everybody else to arrive and thinking what a gorgeous day. How could anything like this happen on a day like that? It was just an absolute beautiful day. And in here was this complete opposite end, this grisly, horrible, ghastly thing that happened. Ontario Provincial Police quickly secure the scene. 4 investigators. The crime scene bears a striking resemblance to the attack that took place less than 2 weeks earlier. Mrs. Ferguson had been shot 3 times. Once in the back and twice in the back of the head. Was very, very similar in every way. Even the victims were very similar, and there were no casings left around the place. So the person who did this knew what he was doing. Charlie Rosa once again shows up at the scene of Helen Ferguson, and once again does his job of identification. Officer, and takes all the necessary photographs, measurements, exhibits. Just like Doreen Morby, Helen Ferguson has been sexually assaulted by someone possessing the blood type A secretrator. Ballistic tests point to a similar weapon, one police believed to be an Shot 22 revolver. The family's similar background suggests they may have been deliberately targeted rather than picked at random. Both the husbands were teachers. Both the wives were nurses. So people were starting to think, is this Ontario's first serial killer? Is he going to strike again? Fear spreads throughout the region as the media reports widely on a criminal now dubbed the 22 Calibre Killer. These 2 murders transfixed the Greater Toronto area. It was the most shocking sort of series of murders that had occurred in the area for years and years and years. It's seldom, but in 2 small villages north of Toronto, Bob's and Edens of the city, that 2 women are killed within 11 days. This guy snuffed out 2 women, gained entrance to their home, raped them, shot one of them 7 times. What rage he must have had toward that woman, and to do that. More than 30 investigators are soon on the case. Part of their hopes rest on a lone witness, 9-year-old Dale Ferguson, the boy who looked directly into the eyes of the man who murdered his mother. Police sketch artist Jim Mayeri meets with Dale, hoping to recover an image from the memory of the traumatized young boy. I remember that the young boy was very intelligent. Children, I think, are by far the best witnesses because they're uninhibited. If you use the right tech, you can get a lot of information from a youngster. But it was a rather daunting task to come up with a picture of somebody that I probably saw for less than 25 seconds. I had photographs of mostly they were mug shots. The idea was for the witness to pick out similarities to help with the initial drawing. You're basically picking facial features. I suppose for an adult, it would be maybe a little bit more of a precise method of getting a description of somebody, but certainly at 8 years old, I was very confused by it all. Making one of those sketches is not easy. The composite reveals a dark complexioned suspect of medium height, likely between 35 and 40 years of age. He is believed to be driving a 1964 or 65 beige Rambler. As the public is enlisted in the hunt, a critical milestone approaches. Although stories vary in the public on the exact number of days between the attacks, fear turns to panic over thoughts that the .22 caliber killer is about to strike again. There was some thought in the greater Toronto area that we have a maniac loose, and what's going to happen in 11 days. And the police thought that as well, and it was one of the largest manhunts ever in the history of Ontario, maybe and in the history of Canada. Could this guy strike 11 days after the second killing? Was he going to strike every 11 days for some weird reason? Well, it couldn't be overlooked. So, when the 11th day rolled around, there was kind of like an alert. It's a rare case where anyone ever stops. They usually escalate. May 30th, 1970, rural Ontario is held hostage by a serial killer who has left 2 women dead in less than 2 weeks. With fears that a third attack will soon follow, all unusual encounters in the region are reported in the media, contributing to a reign of terror. In the tense atmosphere, a widely circulated sketch of the killer and his car leads to a flood of 200 tips a day. 1922. At the time, Ontario Provincial Police Officer Bill McNeil spends his days tracking down the leads. When tips came in, there was a tip sheet filled out. You know, John Brown phoned to say that, I think the composite looks like my neighbor. And so these things had to be checked out. Knowing that the killer's blood type is type A secret-treater, investigators continually strive to narrow the focus of their search. A way that we eliminate a lot of people was that we had them submit to a saliva sample by spitting on a Kleenex. It's not like DNA, where you get this number that says, hey, it's him, and there's no way it's anybody else. It's one in the world. This number identifies you. It identifies me. And a seer doesn't identify you. It helps you to narrow it down. But there's no way that you could convict on a person being an ace secret-trader. By the end of 1970, more than 2,000 suspects have been interviewed, and hundreds of beige Ramblers have been 2036 investigated across the country. Interest in the case begins to fade, and tips from residents dry up. As a reporter for the Toronto Sun, Max 2047 Haynes tries to keep the murders in the public's mind. The case fascinated me that someone could snuff out the lives of 2 young women really in the prime of their life and get away with it cold turkey. I would write about it and the fact that it was still unsolved and thinking that it would jar someone's memory with the killer still on the loose. There is little peace for the families of the victims. Although Albert Morby decides to remain in the family home, the same home where his wife was murdered, the Ferguson family leaves the area faced with a constant fear that the killer may return. There was reason to believe possibly that the killer would come back and kill Dale Ferguson because he was the only witness to the crime. I had seen this person, so there was a concern for my safety. Dale, when we would go for a walk, he was tailing me everywhere I went that I couldn't move 2 in without him moving. So, there was a lot going on inside him. He was living a life of hell. Mr. Ferguson had to split up his family, split up his children and himself from his family at the most traumatic time in their lives. And so on. I thought, well, I've got to have the children somewhere where they can't be traced. And so, they all set off to different places with relatives or friends. Instead of them having their family unit together, Mr. Ferguson, Dale, Scott, and Pam all lived in different residences, and they'd lost their mother. September 1973. Although 3 years have passed, police suddenly get their most promising lead to date. The landlady of a rooming house calls in about one of her former tenants. Not only does she think the man resembles the composite sketch, He used to own a beige-colored Rambler. Tips from other residents begin to point to the same man. And this suspect as well was also known to the people in the area as probably having some form of mental illness. He also had a very violent side to him at times. He used to drive around with a coffin in the back of one of his cars. Following up on the LUD, police finally traced the man to a psychiatric hospital in eastern Canada, where they obtained hair and fluid samples. The suspect has blood type a secretrator, just like the .22 Calibre Killer. Despite widespread suspicions, they are unable to make an arrest. There were numerous people who felt he was the guy. They were just never had enough evidence to lay a charge, or at least be able to obtain a conviction on him. As more years pass, the investigation begins to gather dust as a cold case file. Once a case gets to be 5, 6, 7, 8, and a decade old, police officers resign. They get transferred. I thought it would never be solved. It never left me. I always wanted this to get the guy who did this to these two women. And I continued to write about it. By 1996, 26 years had elapsed since the brutal crimes. As part of a wide-reaching review of cold case files, the Morby Ferguson investigation is examined once again by Ontario Provincial Police. Don McNeil is now a detective inspector. He is one of the few police officers still in the force with a memory of the original attacks. I said, "Listen, I know a little bit about this case because I worked on it originally in 1970. Inspector McNeil was a young police officer at the time of the murders. But now it ends up on his desk, and there's this old Morby Ferguson case in his lap. That's how it happened. It was assigned to him as a cold case. But then he dug in. Remarkably, the original crime scene specimens are still intact in police storage vaults. The Iden officer in 1970, by the name of Charlie Rosen, he had worked on both homicides, and he had packaged and preserved all the exhibits as though he knew something was going to be used on them down the road. Since the original investigation, forensic science has advanced. Instead of crude blood typing tests, the advent of DNA profiling allows police to match suspects to crime scenes with much greater accuracy. Don McNeil submits the semen sample of the .22 Calibre Killer for scientific analysis. He soon has the man's unique genetic fingerprint, hoping to finally confirm a long-held suspicion. He then re-examines the file of a prime suspect in the Morby Ferguson murders. The man police interviewed in a psychiatric hospital back in 1973. There had been hair samples taken from him, and we had them identified. It turned out that it wasn't the right DNA profile. Most people were convinced, police included, that he had committed these atrocious offenses, and he had not. Using the new science, other suspects from the early 1970s are eliminated one by one. Without new evidence, the murderer now seems beyond the reach of justice. But before the file is shelved again, police unexpectedly get their biggest lead in more than a quarter century. It puts them right on the trail of the too elusive .22 Calibre Killer. In the mid-1990s, two simultaneous investigations are underway in Ontario. Detective Inspector Don McNeil is looking into a cold case file on the .22 Calibre Killer. After using DNA to eliminate key suspects from the original investigation, he is seemingly at a dead end. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the province, police are tracking a string of violent robberies. The two investigations will soon be connected through a bizarre sequence of events. June 7, 1995. At a shop in Sault Ste. Marie, a man enters and talks to the clerk, claiming to be purchasing a gift for his wife. 28 minutes and 4 seconds. He took the clerk to an area of the store that wasn't visible to the rest of the store, pulled out a black handgun, pointed it at her, and told her that he was going to tie her up. He tied up her hands and feet, dragged her to a closet, and he went through the clerk's purse, took credit cards, and about $480 worth of cash from her and some costume and jewelry. The crime is similar to other robberies in the region. At the time, Ed Pellerin is an op detective stationed in Northern Ontario. Composite drawings were made of the suspect as a result of interviews from all the victims, and they looked similar. June 16, 1995. The same man approaches a fur and jewelry store elsewhere in Sault Ste. Marie. She showed him around the store. Showed him different items of jewelry that were on sale. And he pulled out black handgun, pointed it at her, tied her up, tied her hands and feet, went through her purse, took a quantity of cash, and about $30,000 worth of men's and women's jewelry. One of the stolen rings turns up at a shop in Sudbury. The person pawning it is captured on video using his own identification. The man's name is Ronald Glenn West. A search of his house turns up more stolen items, along with latex gloves and the rope used in the crimes. Ron was arrested, charged with numerous counts of armed robbery and weapons offenses. He pleaded guilty to those offenses and was sentenced to 8 years incarceration. Although the case on Ron West seems closed, another discovery at his house reveals a bizarre hidden cache. Eventually, the house was purchased by another couple, and they started a major renovation to the house. And while renovating the basement, they removed some cedar ceiling boards, and a plastic bag had fallen out. The bag contained several empty rain boxes.
We need help.
They also located an envelope which contained 2 firearm permits. In the name of Ron West, dated in 1968-1969. One of the gun permits is for a rare, shot .22 caliber pistol. Later that year, in a standard review of cases, Ed Pellerin happens to discuss the Ron West file with Inspector Doan McNeil. The gun permit discovery immediately grabs his interest. The weapon which they felt was used in the murders of Darren Morby and Helen Ferguson was believed to be a 9-shot .22 caliber pistol. This weapon was registered on December the 29th of 1969 and sold in 1972. But yet this individual still kept this piece of paper. Looking deeper, McNeil learns that Ron West was employed as a Metro Toronto police officer between 1966 and 1971, within the time frame of the .22 caliber killings. Other officers that we spoke to that he worked with thought he was kind of a quiet guy, kept to himself. Nothing outstanding or anything along these lines. In the year 1970, I was a police constable with the Toronto Police in 53 Division. He was one of the officers on that I worked with. He's been described, I've heard, as a loner. But you know, in those days, I didn't think he was a loner. He was just a regular guy at the time. Nothing stuck out that you would point your finger at him to be capable of this stuff. He did nothing outstanding in his years in the force, but on the other hand, he did nothing detrimental as well. He was an average police officer doing his job. A lot of his jobs in the late 80s and early 90s were working for mining companies. And his nickname at one of the mining companies was the Ghost, because when work ended at the end of the day, the workers never saw him. So his nickname was the Ghost. And I noticed that he did vacation in the area of Darien Marby. And I also noticed that where he lived, he would have to drive by Alan Ferguson residence. I got thinking, well, we got the firearm certificate. It's a 9-shot. We got the fact that he knows the area. And we got the other fact that he was a police officer at the time. I thought, well, this fella could be a good suspect. A 6-member team is assembled to look more closely at Ron West. So what investigators had is they had 2 homicides from 1970. They had a suspect now, but they needed some way of trying to figure out whether that individual's DNA would match that DNA from the homicides. With only the slightest circumstantial evidence, obtaining a warrant for a blood sample is not an option. In a meeting, Ed Pellerin has a sudden brainstorm. When Ron was in custody in 1995 and sus Marie on the armed robbery charges, he had mailed his wife a letter from the jail. She felt a little embarrassed that her husband would commit these armed robberies and home invasions. And, basically didn't want to have anything to do with him. After that, she called us, asked if we were interested in the letter. She was going to throw the envelope out, and on her consent, she turned the letter over to us. The chances are he licked the stamp. Let's see if we can get a DNA profile. Lee sent the stamp to the Center of Forensic Sciences, and they were able to take DNA extraction from the back of the stamp and get a DNA profile. When that profile was developed, was something like a fingerprint. that was compared to the DNA profile found in the semen, which was on some of the items of clothing worn by Mrs. Morby and Mrs. Ferguson when they were murdered. Although not conclusive, the two samples appear to be extremely similar. 35 to 27, Ron West is now the most promising suspect in more than 2 decades. Really, all that the profile did on the stamp was tell us that the person who had licked the stamp was a strong suspect or a suspect for those homicides in 1970. We still had to do a lot of work. But what it did, it gave us sufficient grounds at that time to obtain a warrant, a blood warrant. Police now prepare to get legal permission to draw blood directly from their latest suspect. Even if the blood provides a stronger DNA match, they still face the daunting task of trying to convict a suspect for crimes that are more than a quarter century old. January 1999 in Ontario. Police investigating a 29-year-old double murder are building a case against former police officer Ron West. While awaiting to take DNA samples directly from their suspect, they gather exhibits from the early 1970s. Forensic expert Gary Savage helps dig through police storage lockers and vaults. What we had to ensure was no evidence had been misplaced.